Hello again, everyone. Once again, I will try to explain what we are doing about our studies of knowledge creation in arts and particularly in artistic communities. We did this research initially in St. Petersburg, trying to understand how knowledge is created in arts through different communication practices used by artistic communities within communities and between communities and the broader publics and during interaction of communities with the urban environment and stuff like that. And what we found were very different ways creative communities approach the cities, the publics, and but anyway, we noticed that throughout these processes, which we actually expected, that during these processes, creative communities, what they do is shifting and transforming the structures of meanings, what we call knowledge structures, not only within communities but also around them. And our hypothesis is that they do that and that they employ different kinds of communication strategies and tactics to influence publics and to communicate to them different meanings, and moreover transforming how these publics see the world, how they see the art, and in some cases how they see politics, how they see the city, and so on and so forth. And they, in different ways, they involve the city space in these processes to perform this communication with the publics. And in 2012, what we tried to do is to go beyond St. Petersburg, where we studied 4 creative communities, and to compare these processes to those taking place in Barcelona and Berlin, where we did similar research, and to try to find out how communities differ in their knowledge creation approaches, these strategies and tactics across different cities, and how they sort of consider the city environment when they choose certain ways to approach their publics and to construct meanings, and how their communicative behavior in the city depends on the city context they are embedded in. So basically, this is what our presentation is about. Well, I more or less said that. We consider knowledge as something which is context-specific, embedded in particular social contexts, in particular social entities, which is really close to distributed cognition concept. And we are going further, considering knowledge as exclusively collective, something emerging exclusively in collective interaction, and not belonging to any single individual, but only sort of shared structure, shared cognitive structure. And this is what knowledge is, in our opinion. And I said that, and yeah, I said that as well. In terms of empirical study, we use the same, mostly we use the same techniques as in St. Petersburg, with a little bit different focus. So we focused on the strategies and tactics artistic communities use in the cities to engage the publics in reconceptualization of city places, of the practices these publics practice, and local events and art. We compared 3 cases. We took one of creative communities which is in St. Petersburg, and 2 others, one in Barcelona and one in Berlin. For data collection we used interviews, techniques, participant observation and analysis of texts. So now we will just try to travel around these 3 European cities and compare different city contexts, try to find linkages between city contexts and the strategies and tactics of communication which the communities select. And I give the word to Alexandra, starting from St. Petersburg.
Thank you. So I will go in a way that I will give a brief description of the city context, and then I will talk about the overall strategy of communication in the city space of the community, and then several tactics that they use to perform this strategy, and of course the examples of certain artistic practices. So here you see our city. But for Daphne it's not her city still, but we'll come to Barcelona.
But in St. Petersburg you won't see it.
Yeah, maybe you recognize some of these sites. Really we have some of the creative places in the city are connected more to the industrial area that is trying to be redeveloped, but still, well, St. Petersburg is really a cultural capital, and it has a lot of tradition, a lot of historical, cultural resources. In a way, though it's not very developed in terms of art market. Art market here is very localized, and in fact it depends mostly on Moscow art market, because everything that goes on in contemporary art here, it is somehow linked to Moscow.
And it used to be sold there.
Yeah, so our artists make careers through Moscow. Those who are based in St. Petersburg. There is not much support from the government or non-governmental organizations, so you won't find in St. Petersburg any associations, creative networks or alike, and if you do, they are not working very much, because in fact they are more fake than something real. In terms of communication with the publics and within the artists themselves, it is an interesting situation, because St. Petersburg, compared to Moscow, for example, is a city of communities, artistic communities, more than individual artists. But these communities are more focused on themselves and on communicating with their closer circles, people who they know, experts from the art field, or maybe friends, and they are not engaged too much into the conversation with the public. So participatory approach in art is also some sort of novelty, or something that is more on a margin nowadays than in a trend. Though of course our artists, some of the artists make this their unique point, yes, to use this some sort of participatory approach, and there is not very much the practice of criticizing or like discussing or commenting on each other works is not also too spread within the artists here. And in terms of like these things about creative city and creative clusters and the like, well, there are some places and spaces that really that government or I don't know, some businessmen try to invest into, but really these creative spaces are very limited in number, and some of them do not work. For example, this Красный треугольник here is not very, so to say, successful in its creative story. So St. Petersburg is not a creative city, well, maybe for the time being, but still.
In the strict meaning of the term.
In the strict meaning of the term. In Florida's meaning of the term. Though Florida discusses that Russia maybe and potentially is on the second place in terms of creative class. So here is one of the cases that we made research on one of the creative communities, and it's called Parasite or Parasite in English, if we translate it. And there are certain features of this artistic community. Of course, first we should mention that in terms of the membership, there are senior artists in Parasite who were engaged for several decades. Yes, of years into the outsider tradition of art in St. Petersburg, and they were linked to philosophical and cultural, intellectual, so to say, circles. And there are also young ones, junior parasites, who come here to seek for some chances to exhibit, some chances to be contemporary artists, because there is no much space in the city for the youngsters to do this. And as I said, there is a tradition of outsider art, and it reproduces in a way in Parasite, because the main strategy, well, not say strategy, I can't use this word now, but like the main approach, the main program of Parasite, as they put it themselves, is to occupy the bodies of other cultural institutions or other artistic institutions, meaning that they really are engaging into the practice of parasiting. So they come into some of the institutions and exhibit rather regularly, but not in intended places. But they do their exhibitions, for example, in the corridor of an art center, on the wall of the theater, in a shop, even in the bathroom of the art center. Yeah. Taking this into account, I should say that Parasite has a, so to say, alternative approach to art. They mostly do their artworks in a trash style, using like recycling techniques, for example, and also because parasiting is not only an approach to the artworks, but also like a lifestyle. They are doing a lot of parasiting, a lot of performing, so to say, in the galleries and also in the city streets, coming out into the city space and trying to claim their identity there. Oh no, I didn't. Where is it?
What is it?
Yeah, I didn't just want to. Yes, just wanted to pay your attention to the strategy that we formulate for the parasite, the strategy of communicating with the city space in terms of artistic approach. We call it escape into alternative reality.
Which they to an extent create themselves.
Yes, because they really make this alternative art, and also we will see what they do in terms of using the city space, for example. One of the tactics that the strategy is embodied in is the intimidation of the city space. Well, all of these words are of course metaphoric, because we try just to name and to notion the things that we see in our artists. And here we present some pictures, some photos that show how artists try to make the alienated city space, the city space that it is not ours, something that reminds of home, or a space where I can do whatever I like, where I can drink tea, or where I can lie in the snow, or where I can just do something that I do in private space. So an artist intimizes the city space, thus claiming that art like has no margins, and that the city is also the arena of artistic practice. And also they, of course, doing this, they engage the attention of city dwellers that just are surprised and have a chance to refocus their attention, to shift their classical perception schemes of the
Maybe
city
just
space.
a couple of words of what they do here, because it's not always clear for an outsider.
For me?
Yes,
From me?
you know,
So this was a performance. Actually, we make a little fake thing here, but still. This is a performance by the ancestors of the parasite. Well, the senior members are young here, so this is the community that was like before the parasite, but we link them because they really have a very connected strategy.
They transferred those tactics into the current ones as well.
So what they did is they just took a table and they carried it through the city spots, central ones as well as not central ones, and they just put this table, and they
all of these are central.
They had a typewriting machine, and they sat on a chair and they typewrote a scenario, and they wanted to go. The destination was the Manege, the big art exhibition place here, where they wanted to present this scenario. So, in fact, on the go, they created some piece of art, but they really did a performance from this. And also, you see that like there were publics interacting with them. Some people just ran away. Some people looked and didn't say nothing. And some of the people came to them and asked questions. And of course, like the officers also like came and asked questions, but then they engaged people, and even this police officer was interested in what they do, and he didn't do anything to prevent this performance.
So they sort of used the city space as their workshop.
As their workshop, as their home. I think that it is not on the photos now, but they also had a small teapot, and they drank tea, and they also sang songs and claimed, well, they pronounced some verses, some poems. So it was, yeah, I know. Oh, sorry. So we call this also the sort of intimidation of the city space. Well, of course, we can interpret this in some other ways, like exhibitionism, I don't know, but still, you know, when you are walking around your home place in this.
After an exhibition.
So another tactic that we find out is the questioning of artistic conventions. Well, I told you that this is an alternative art, so of course what they do in fact is targeting some critics on the conventions of the art field, but doing this in a soft way, so to say, tactical way, because it is an irony that targets the art field concepts and also the reshaping of the normal art spaces. Well, I told you about the exhibitions in non-intended places, yes, like this one, well, because they put some conceptual piece of art into the toilet of the art center, but also they brought the dog into this white cube gallery. This was a dog just living in the street, not very normal for the artists.
And they were exhibiting it as if it's an...
yes, it was like walking around, but also
in a cell.
In a cell, yes, like a piece of art. Yeah, and what is also interesting for them, they took some pictures, well-known pictures by well-known authors. For example, you know Damien Hirst and his skull made of brilliance, of diamonds, sorry. But this is a work made of sugar beet. And the same when artists introduces the rabbit to the Joseph boys. So just
taking the rabbit through the boys' exhibition in St. Petersburg.
Yes, you know the relation of the boys to the fur and all of these things. Yes, so it's like a piece of joke, an irony that questions some of the acknowledged conventions, images, even stereotypes of the art field. And the third tactic that we will tell you about is artistification of the city space. So we have this, well, so to say, dull city space, or a space that is not used, or a space that is not maybe interesting, and it is very. It doesn't relate to art at all, but artists, parasites, think that art can be everywhere. So, for example, I told you about the exhibiting in the shops when they bring pieces of art into the shelves, yes, and just buying something and just looking for some products, a person finds out a piece of art. It is also connected to the putting some of the artistic things into the channel. Yes, they're very contemporary, these pieces of art, but still it is like a little message. And also performances which are also trying to, in a way, trying to engage city dwellers into some conversation, though they are very not very participative in their approach, but the young artists, they just took the dog. It was a festival of the street art.
Is it a wolf?
And it is a dog, and they pretended that they are surgeons, and this is policemen, and this is their friend, their helper, their assistant, the dog who is looking for the criminal. And they walked around, and the dog just like knocked into the window, asking for, do you know what the criminal is? Because today or this night there was a crime. They are always playing, these people, these young artists. They are always trying to deconstruct these everyday life conversations, just like doing a piece of Garfinkeling, but not in the way of Garfinkel does it, but in their own way. They even have a philosophy for this. But in this way, they bring some artistic objects and even understandings into the everyday life space. So I don't know about the time.
I just jumped to the Barcelona.
Yeah, but maybe we will tell about Barcelona later. I don't know, but still.
Just do that first.
I can't.
Just the main point about the Barcelona case.
Barcelona.
How it's different.
What is really crucial here? Of course, Barcelona is also a cultural capital, and a lot of resources there through economic crisis and everything. And art is not very well. There's not very much money to invest into, but Barcelona is different. First, it is a creative city already, because there are creative clusters, there are the politics of redevelopment of the former industrial areas, and it also hinders the communities of artists that were living in these spaceships and industrial spaceships that were demolished by the redevelopment process. So there is already a conflict between the creative city, yes, as we know it, politics of creative city, and the grassrooted creation. And also there is a very strong sense of community, this strong sense of communal life in Barcelona. There are a lot of associations. There is a real understanding of what is a neighborhood. Here we only talk about this, but Barcelona really does have it. So artists are embedded in a space that is politicized, that is has struggled for against, so to say, creative city politics, and also that is very Gemeinschaft-like, association-like. And here is our community. La Escocesa, it is in fact, it used to be informal association of artists that occupied an industrial building. Then there was a process of redevelopment, and they were under the threat of demolishing. But then there was a public resonance, and government bought a building and gave it to La Escocesa. But government asked La Escocesa to be included into this official creative city network called the Fabrics of Creation. So La Escocesa is now in the process of transformation. The main thing about it is that La Escocesa is still has some hints on some features of a community of free artists, informal community like Gemeinschaft in Tony's terms, well, in our interpretation of Tony's terms, but it is also on the route to professionalization, to create a fabric of creation and things like that. So, in fact, what we find as a main strategy of the community is the defense of this Gemeinschaft, solidarity. And what do they do, these artists, to do this? And I also should mention that there are senior artists as well, who were the parts of this initial community, and young ones who come to on a regular basis for 2 years. They are professional ones, but they are included also into some style of life in the community. The community first, what it tries to do, or what the artists try to do, not maybe consciously, but we find these traces in their activity. They try to create, they try to communalize their space. In fact, what they have, for example, these shared spaces that are marked with art objects, just for example, this collection of meaningful stamps and cards that is represents the meaningful objects for the community of artists. So every of the members of the community has put his own card here. There are shared spaces that are decorated by everyone, so everyone puts someone into this. There are schemes of cohabitation, so to say, and some nominations of the places that are owned by an artist, but in combination with the shared spaces, it creates a feeling of a community that is really regulating its space to make it looking more like a commune. And also what is really connected to this is creating like home identity. So they sign the borders of the community, like the entrance. They put some
artistic objects on the roof. Is it the roof?
Yes, it is the roof, and they try to make themselves to feel at home in every space. They also bring some, you see, some home objects like from the interior design into the outside, and decorate the shared objects with some things that make us feel at home. For example, ecological things like greenery and everything. They also have this practice of cultivating the gardens. For example, there is a garden on the roof, and one of the artists even told me that he's a street artist, but he told me that he's doing ecological art on the roof. So, like Escocesa is his space of work. And also, it is like not, it is a tactic that is not shared by everyone, but still it is shared by the group of street artists, young ones, who came to La Escocesa like on this basis of residency, but being like more professional, they are still trying to save this community sense, yes, of living. So what is presented here is that even being professionals and trying to make works for galleries on canvases. You imagine street art on canvas, yeah? In fact, something paradoxical, but still, they do this for like commercial success, yes, for exhibiting in the galleries. But when they do this, they try to do it collectively, not like in individual practice. So in this way, they question this approach in commercial art that like you can be successful only on individual terms. Do we do Berlin, or we don't have time for this?
Try to do it fast, because it really makes sense to compare all the three.
Okay, so I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. Well, Berlin, you know, acknowledged capital of contemporary art and everything. There are quite a big. There is quite a big amount of resources and a lot of communities, and also the tradition of discussion between the artists, and also tradition of public involvement. And in this context, one of the communities, Kunstrepublik, is founded. It was founded by 5 artists. In fact, it started like a project-based group, because they had a big project. It's not presented here, I mean the name, but it was called Skulpturenpark. Skulpturenpark. Oh yeah. This German pronunciation. And what they did was working in one space that was like a wasteland for several years, because it is located, on the
in between
Eastern and Western Berlin, and you imagine what kind of space this is, yes? So like not used, and even maybe connected with a sort of a trauma. So we named their strategy a reappropriation struggle, because they struggled to reappropriate this big space and to bring more sense in there, and to bring publics
back to the artists and the
in there. So here we can define several tactics. So maybe first was that it was a space without anything, so an abandoned space, an empty space, and what the artists do, they try to fill it physically, materially, yes, and also giving these physical innovations some interpretations. So they try to do some landscape things here, for example, bringing in natural objects, but they do it not in a tradition of open air museum, but like more in a more natural landscape, so to say. So
they are mostly using the objects that are already there.
Yes, so
like
found art.
Mainly to avoid the gentrification, which is a normal problem for Berlin.
Yeah.
And they know it, that if they just fill it, make it a museum and fill it with artistic objects, it will immediately attract certain transformations to the neighborhood, probably.
But also at the time was Skulpturenpark started as a project, because at that time they were not aware of the dangers of gentrification. But in fact, already then, it was the space that they appropriated was the property of private owners. It was just it was temporarily not used by them. And therefore, from the very beginning, the projects had to be temporary, not changing in any significant and eternal way the whole structure of the space. And afterwards, the whole idea of gentrification came to the scene.
Okay. So linked to this is the
So they had to make something out of this empty space, which it was a transitory space between East and West Berlin, and which was associated with this division of Berlin and with nothing else actually, an empty space, Pustit in Russian.
Wasteland.
You can see here people just walking through it, and even the path is cut off by the fences, and people try to walk fast through this space as fast as possible. You can imagine what it looks like at night, for instance. And of course, you want to escape as fast as possible. So they tried to. Well, the main thing Amicia noticed was that they tried to investigate the previous history of the space and to show that there was something before this Soviet dominance, and that the space has history which goes into the centuries, and they tried to find some pieces of architecture to dig those out, and so on and so forth. And yeah, they tried to introduce a lot of objects which were meant to involve publics, which were participatory from the beginning, unlike, for instance, communities in St. Petersburg. For example, they introduced those, how do you call it,
flower beds.
Flower beds, for which
these shapes here,
artistically. Organized, which the
publics could come.
Nearby publics
neighbors could come
and grow flowers. Or they, for example, introduced this lamp. I don't remember the German name, of course. As far as am I right to remember, it was hanging like in the middle of this space between the buildings, and. Is it right? So initially it was always the constant light.
No,
and then they
just hang it out. It was a huge lamp hanging between two apartments. And the important thing here was that apartments were very different, because one was inhabited by people from low strata, ethnically diverse and very marginal in a way. Whereas the second building across the wasteland was inhabited by much richer people, they were probably not really well off, but much better off, and they had almost no communication in between. So what they did is hanging this lamp, and the people in apartments had a remote controller. So they could switch on and switch off the lamp from the apartments, but the problem was that there were just several of them. So people had to see each other, make contact with each other by giving the controller to
each other, passing
That's how
it.
Communication emerged between people.
Simple lamp, but participation here.
So I made the moderator participate, and this is not our time. This was your time.
That's really, come on.
We'll tell that to the security people. They will take you away. It appears too small to read. Just as a conclusion, so we have three very different strategies for three very different cities in terms of different factors, as Alexandra explained. We have Kunstrepublik, which tries to avoid gentrification risks using objects that change the identity of space and bring it back to people, but at the same time don't make it a sort of museum and attractive for gentrification. We would probably call it a sort of offensive strategy used by the community because they try to capture this space in such a way. La Escaseza, it is opposing this, how would you put it, opposing this
creative city politics.
Active engagement, not of the publics but of the city authorities. which try to make profit of the space and try to make space work for as a creative industry, work for the money.
Yes, they try to typify, professionalize all of these creative spaces, even just.
Yeah. But they try to involve local communities and to become more embedded in this space, to oppose it with to confront these attempts to make the space more conventional and more trivial with this defensive strategy they used. And in case of Parasite, when we have St. Petersburg, which is not really sort of good for making arts in the city, in the urban space, and where the publics are not very well prepared on the one hand, and the city government is also not really inclined to support art.
There is no support, in fact.
Yes,
yeah.
and in a situation with this adornment of the contemporary art, the blind one, without a lot of criticism and analysis. So what they try to do is to create something different. I called it partisani.
Yeah, but really they try
in
to.
In terms of these three strategies, I think it expresses what is meant to say. So it's not an offense, not a defense, but some kind of
it is less direct
through, but not direct confrontation. Not a sort of embedding art, not directly, but
it is less direct, it is more provocative, and it is really even a self-irony. So in fact they question not only art or art spaces, but they question themselves as artists, in fact.
And
so it is very, very postmodern, I would say. Yeah. So here it is. Yeah, we are done. Yeah.
Oh, okay, applause. Now we have to be very active and quick discussion. First, in some 20 minutes, the people from downstairs will come and try.
Will come and try and kick us.
Okay, so questions, comments? I actually have a question, although probably I'm not allowed to ask because that's what we formulated together, but now it's super concerned.
That's very good that you are concerned about these things.
I kind of started doubting what is the distinction between the two strategies that we trace in Barcelona and in St. Petersburg with Parasite, because what we find in St. Petersburg was called the space, the utilization of space. What was found in Barcelona was the creation of home-like identity of the space.
Yeah.
Probably making the space home-like presupposes a huge extent of intimization, because private space is an intimate space by definition. So how would you describe the difference between the two?
Well, in terms of what we were looking at, it is one basic distinction here, that intimization of the space, we call it like intimization of the city space. So they try to appropriate, in these terms, the city space for their private practices. And for the case of the Barcelona, they have their building, and the building is threatened by the creative politics, yes, because it might become this faceless building of a creative space, but they try to work with it and they try to create home in there by marking it with some home-like things, borders, spaces, subspaces, so to say. But maybe in terms of intimizing, privatizing, these strategies, these tactics, are pretty much alike. So in terms of space, there are different. In terms of, so to say, technology, there are pretty much alike. Oh, it's a microphone here.
Okay. Natasha, please.
Thank you. So thank you for your presentation. And I really like your research design with these two levels of analysis. So, the obvious question is how do you choose the case of community for each of the cities? Is it a typical case, or it is just the case you found? And for example, in St. Petersburg, you have 5 or 6 communities.
4.
4. Okay. Why you choose Parasite? And is the situation that you have a community and you try to interpret it in terms of the context, or you try to study a context maybe to look for distinct factors, because in your presentation there are different factors. For example, the relation of attitude of public to art, the politics of government, city government, and so on. And looking at these factors, you try to find typical or not typical, or a variety of cases, and look for differences and similarities just to make a causal link between the context and the content of this community. And for the less variant, it is much more interesting, and it is like a wide perspective for your future research, and I think you have it, but it needs like a clarification of your structural hypothesis, and from this point a look at your cases as typical or not typical or something.
Thank you. So,
so the point was here in this particular piece of research to take a variety of cases and to take them.
Well, in St. Petersburg we took 4, and they really not here, but in St. Petersburg, in like initial research, we took 4 of them, and they really represented really very diverse types. And when we found out, we tried to typify other communities. They they were alike, these 4. So in fact, they represented the крайние случаи. How to say? Extreme cases. Thank you. And this is a strategy in case analysis. But in Berlin and Barcelona, in fact, we tried to find a community that corresponded to the concept of the creative community that was elaborated in the research. So it has to be like a community of more no less than 6 people, and like having shared practices and having everyday life practices, having maybe some space, not physical maybe, but still where they do something together, or having a common communication space, maybe in the internet, as we had one community in St. Petersburg which doesn't have any physical space at all.
We also consulted local researchers to know what's the variety of communities there, and to select the one Matthias section.
Yes, and of course there was a helping hand that we had insiders in these communities. So to put it straight, maybe in Barcelona and in Berlin we should do more analysis of other cases, for example, to have this, to fulfill this extreme cases strategy. Yeah, but in these 2 cities we don't have this thing.
What about Berlin?
The same thing actually. So we wanted the case in Berlin to be kind of comparable to what we had in St. Petersburg. So our basic properties that we expected from a community was first, it should be an artistic community working basically with visual arts. The fact that they were expected to work, at least to some extent, with the urban space, because it was our priority and our research question. And we also, in this case, consulted the local researchers. So the feature of accessibility of the field was also decisive, of course, because we had only a very short time for research, and therefore we had to concentrate very much on one case.
We had a lot of restrictions during case selection. When we want artistic community, we want observable artworks, and we want them to somehow engage with urban space. Now, in any city, you won't find many of these, so then the circle is pretty narrow.
So on the second part of the question, why did we select Parasite to represent St. Petersburg? Well, in fact, we wanted to select Airy, but just to fit into the time, we couldn't do this. But of course, we can relate each of our 4 to the city context, but in different ways, because there are different strategies of communicating with the city space, communicating with the publics, in positioning the community in the art field. Maybe it is also that
Что делать, which was presented in Leeds this summer, so it can be done for the
yeah. Well, maybe just Parasite is something that sounds a bit more like exaggerated for the presentation, because it's so alternative, so to say. So it could just give you more sense of what can be, what is going on in St. Petersburg. And also about the causal relations, well, in fact, I don't, yeah. As always, I don't like to. We don't like to speak of causal relations here. We only speak of relations. Yes. So we can associate this feature with this thing, but what was first and what was the consequence is not the question for us and here.
Not relation, not a correlation, but a situation.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
A
just
frame.
a small comment about this. Maybe if you will have just 4 cases for St. Petersburg, for Berlin and Barcelona, you will see that the strategies for some cities are similar, and maybe not to tell strict on causal relations, but comparison, systematic comparison. It helps to provide these links. For example, you will see that this strategy depends not on government policy, but only on relations with publics, artists with public, this on state policy, this on the level, and so on and so forth. And I suppose it could be interesting, like future years.
We'll do that in the paper we are currently working on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I have just 2 small questions. Maybe some of them are close to the previous one. The first, you've said about the cities, that some of them are creative cities and some of them are not. So you've also said about the communications between the communities. And so the question is, how do you think does the communities itself, other communities, influence to what these communities do? I mean, not the communication, maybe not the net of them, but only what they do. Perhaps one of them they prefer to write something on the buildings. So. Then we are parasites and we won't do that, or we will do that but better. So this thing.
So you mean, does the communities that are there in the city influence?
Yeah.
No.
I mean that maybe what they do, these communities do, they do it like the opposite thing.
Like a strategy of positioning.
Yeah.
Again, this word, strategy. A lot of this word today. Well, in fact, yes, there is a reason in your words, because, parasites, in fact, what they try to do is to a pause in a way, because these artists, well, some of them are very young, and they just, for now, they want to gain some attention. They do not have any success yet. Yes, some of them are senior, but don't have success already, or.
Yes.
But some of them are really well known already in the context of contemporary art. So maybe for some of the artists who are not well known, it is like an only strategy to gain attention. But what is another thing, that parasites are like aware that the art world in St. Petersburg is very closed, and it's very dull for them. So it is like something without air, and they want to breathe. So they want to расшатать. Расшатать этот мир. They want to challenge this situation. They want like just to give it a kick, a harsh push. I don't know. So in fact, it is an opposition style, and from other point of view, it is not. It is like attitude to life. In fact, to art. And some of them really even combine both, being successful artists and going into the galleries, and at the same time being playful artists and going into the city streets
to have fun.
To have fun. But they combine these paradoxical, so to say, features in one person, and they are, I don't know. It is their way of life, I would say, more.
Well, I like the presentation a lot, and there's a lot of questions that I'd like to ask. So I'm trying to decide. I know. I'm trying to decide what's more relevant to the discussion that we had here. The same thing as you, when I was thinking about style, because we talk about different objects, different pieces of art, and I would like to know if there's some kind of background. Let's explain myself. So I don't know the case of Barcelona at all. I don't know this group. I don't know much about the underground scene in Barcelona, but I'm very suspicious about strategies like the one you described of co-opting, artistic groups and then putting them into the clusters or professionalization, and because it really seems like a gentrification process all over again, but in art in a way. So my guess, but I have no idea, would be maybe that I don't know if you presented it this way, that Berlin would be the good case in the sense that there's let's see, what do you think about it? In the sense that there's more space for artists to do what they want to do. And then Barcelona would be the negative case in the sense that artists have less space to do what they want to do. What do you think about that? No? Because my
then St. Petersburg has the least space to do what they want to do.
Lost the struggle.
They lost the struggle.
Well,
Yes.
I think that was a struggle without hope. What was not a struggle with hope, because we wanted
And last success is probably losing.
from the very beginning,
Yeah.
they knew that the space they are working with will be at some point lost.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite clearly, and actually, the whole history of Kurs Republic is the history of constant, like running away from gentrification. Of course, many of them, as I told some other presentations of ours, were forced to change their studios 3 times in a row because of gentrification in different areas of Berlin. Berlin is well known for highest possible level of gentrification. It's only that now they have experienced a lot and they are very reflexive about those dangers. But on the other hand, contemporary Kurs Republic, because Sculpture Park is something behind, it's the past, the recent past, but still the past. But the contemporary Kurs Republic are turning very fast into the curators and managers from arts. They are not working so much on their own projects, but curating and moderating things now. So probably they are also now an example of commercialization of art and a more pragmatic approach. The older, the more pragmatic, so to say. So probably, of course, there was a kind of oversimplification in the presentation. Of, like, it seems now for the publics that Barcelona is posed as a more negative case in comparison to Berlin.
Well, but in fact,
it's my perception more than the presentation. No, it's basically my.
In fact, Barcelona, well, it is under the threat. In fact, as well as the Kurs Republik, maybe it is also that this process of transformation, of turning into the fabric of creation, is only on its way. But we see the case of complete transformation from the community into the fabric of creation, and it's the closest neighbor and the closest partner of La Escocesa, which is called Hangar, and it's almost totally professionalized, and its space is completely different. For example, the interior, when you come into this space, you see the white cube, like very functional. Yes, there are of course shared spaces, but they are more like, I don't know, managerially planned. So
it looks like a plant.
Yeah. So it's like a huge space.
With some divisions.
Is, what's the background question? What's the first? So what's the main? What's your general initial research question? Is it that a certain type of management allows for more creative outputs, or because in one sense, like my perception was that in Russia, but I don't know if it only in Moscow or not in St. Petersburg, but there was a lot of art being done, a lot of good or like well-recognized contemporary art, much more than Barcelona, for example. Barcelona is very well known for for the Barcelona brand, and it is very commercial and not alternative. And I would say maybe Madrid has more of the alternative products in a way. But, and of course Berlin has this history of alternative art. So I don't know, I guess my question would be what's related to the creativity, community creativity that you talked about, what is it that makes something more creative or less creative, or more alternative or less alternative, because I guess you need to have this standard clear in order to define all that, right? And I think it's a very interesting and difficult thing to do.
Well, in fact, I'm not sure that we can answer, because in fact we have less alternative cases in our data in St. Petersburg, and I'm sure that in Barcelona and in Berlin as well. So I don't think that we can measure what is less or more.
But it's more like a theoretical thing. It's not that much. It's more like how you define theoretically your.
Well, here we were focusing mostly on the this linkage between the so-called creative style or strategy in the in the city space and the city space itself, and the traditions in the art field, more than alternative art or tradition of alternative art, or in any factor. We don't evaluate any single factor here, because all of them can be in different combinations.
Of course, we try to grasp the major properties of the city context. Like, for example, the level of institutional support of the creative industries, and the scale of the artistic market of contemporary art, and the extent to which there is a discursive field of the tradition of mutual criticism and discussion of artworks. And we listed the number of contextual properties. It's just that probably with this amount of data we're not able to trace the influence of all of them, but we suspect them to influence the whole situation altogether.
And the media.
And the media, of course, but it's all very much interconnected. So the broader city context and the art market are very influential in this.
what about social networks? And that's it. The social network thing would be interesting as well. Technology, if these different community of artists relate to each other, if they communicate across. Because my intuition is that probably there's more. The group here is much more similar to a group in I don't know, in Berlin than other groups. So maybe there's like more connections that are not exactly national but international. For example, I went to the Biennale in Venice, and a very good Russian pavilion, by the way. I don't know if the artist was from Moscow or not, but yeah. But all what you could see is that most of the contemporary art there was very similar, right? They had some relationship. So it's like this community of, you could say like the community of contemporary art. And the Russian artist was similar to the Dutch artist, and it was similar to, because probably something about style as well, right? Or so it would be interesting to see the connections between these different clusters or groups or communities.
I wonder if the curator, to what extent the curator defined which exact pieces of art were selected for this.
Yeah. True.
Actually, it's a very good
They were
question.
defined.
That would be the most
Well, inside, no, in theory,
I would
each state chooses, so that it has a curator, and then the curator chooses the artist nationally.
Yeah, but mostly they choose, I would say, what is in mainstream or what is in the topic of the Biennale.
Actually, we looked at the orientation of the artists towards the global markets in our St. Petersburg cases. There were questions in the interviews, and actually many would stress that they would like to go international, but in St. Petersburg you have less possibility to do so as in Moscow, for example. And the major argument that we collected was kind of that, look, I heard that there were such topics and such artistic expression styles in such biennales and such biennales in Moscow and Venice and worldwide, and we did exactly the same, although probably we didn't have the same amount of resources. So we are quite comparable already, but probably people just don't know about us. So it's like kind of self-legitimation in a way. But artists are clearly seeing this balancing between the global and the local as part of their life context.
Yeah, in St. Petersburg they can't see it in other way, because in fact there is also a problem of periphery and the center, and as I told you in the presentation, to come out into the international market, the St. Petersburg artist goes through Moscow. Yes, so he first goes to Moscow and then to
Finland, and there's
not maybe always, of course, but like in most of the mainstream things, yes. We have one community that was really very much acknowledged abroad, though not acknowledged here in the beginning, and this was a politically engaged community who do political art. So like it was in the end of the Soviet, no, it was after the Soviet Union collapse, but well, it was like all of this process of political liberation. Yeah, you understand me. And when the political art sounded as nonsense, it was not yet accepted in Russia by intellectuals. They started to do this, and also some of people started to do that in Moscow, but there was a real struggle between them, because they were struggling like for not even for attention but for grants from foreign institutions. And foreign institutions, of course, were very interested in that moment in the political art in Russia. So this new liberally oriented, not liberally oriented, like, I don't know, Marxism-oriented communities and all of these trends and everything. So our community was there before they were acknowledged here, not through Moscow, like directly.
very different.
As far as I can see from the presentation, there is difference between cases in St. Petersburg and Berlin and the case from Barcelona. Barcelona's case is more like a street art, classic street art that is fulfilling the space of the city with symbols which are easy to understand from the eyes of the user of the space. And apart from that, St. Petersburg and Berlin cases are more epatiruющие the common space and
Shocking. I don't know, provocative.
Look at this like a marker of art freedom, or it's just a strategy. Like, you know, if the space is more open for not a creator, but for changings to make it more friendly or more useful, or no, like in St. Petersburg it's
I think that I understand that in St. Petersburg it's more alternative because there are like no
it's more
opportunities. Well, in fact, in La Escocesa it's not the whole truth, and sorry maybe for this misrepresenting of the community, because street art is only one of the groups in the La Escocesa community. There are a lot of other artists. There is photography, serigraphy, installation, sculpture, conceptual art, and even some, I don't know, traditional art, so to say, well, people painting on the canvas. But, and in fact, the pictures that you saw, they were made by different artists. It's just that maybe there was an accent on some accent, yes, on the street art, but it's not like this. And in terms of openness, well, I don't know. Well, street art is not is a shocking thing in a way. I don't know why you think that it's not. It's more conventional because, well, I don't know. They do things in I don't know, without permissions in on the walls of the city streets and like that. And maybe the situation that we told you about, all of these creative city things, is also a factor that doesn't make Barcelona that open, as you say.
I have some subjective.
Excuse me, but I don't think we have any time.
Anytime. We have to be kicked off this place.
Seems like we are now getting locked within the building.
Literally.
Yeah, I think that we can just.
Discussion in a more informal setting already.
Okay.
By now, thank you very much.